This training program aims to update, develop the competencies of content teachers in assisting students comprehend and learn with texts. Since English is the medium of instruction in science, the complementary roles of English teachers in developing content area or disciplinary literacy in science are explored.
So, why are we putting attention on science and English? Actually, math can also be part of this, but um, because we have a different arrangements in terms of the facilitators and writers, we are just having the group of science with English. So we brought up the importance of the complementary roles of teachers in both subject areas because they are both concerned with literacy. Of course, English teachers are concerned with also with basic literacy skills, what we call the developmental skills and the foundational skills. But increasingly, these teachers are also involved with the functional skills that have to do with content area literacy and disciplinary literacy. I have included these additional slides because we were asked by DepEd, I think, to mention which of the new Philippine professional standards for teachers are covered by the program. I've identified 7 of the 12 strands. The first one is content knowledge and its application within and across the curriculum. Second is strategies for promoting literacy and numeracy. Next is strategies for developing critical and creative thinking, as well as higher order thinking skills. Fourth is knowledge of learners' gender, needs, strengths, interests, and experience. Next is planning and management of teaching and the learning process. Next is professional collaboration to enrich teaching practice. And the next one is teaching and learning resources, including information and communication technologies. So that's very much obvious in the title of our program. So what does literacy mean to you? So I think we have a more comprehensive view of literacy, whereas simply before it was only simply known as the ability to read and write. Today, it's about making sense of and engaging in advanced reading, writing, listening, and speaking, not to mention viewing, which is a domain that has been added in the new curriculum. So it is this definition that we should keep in mind when we speak of literacy across the curriculum. As far as content areas are concerned, which include science, there is an advanced kind of literacy which we will get to define a bit later. This is the old paradigm in terms of what we call reading in the content areas. Before, we normally use the word reading rather than literacy. But more and more, the skills encompass other types of literacy. So the word literacy has replaced reading in many of the conversations. That's why even the International Reading Association has now become the International Literacy Association. Okay, look at the diagram a bit more, and we'll see what you understand from this diagram. One of the competencies, literacy competencies, is being able to interpret tables, diagrams, and other types of infographics. What do we mean by the K-12 there? In the y-axis ba yan or x-axis? The x-axis. It indicates the grade levels of the curriculum. The blue one refers to developmental reading. These are the three components of the overall school reading program seen from the old paradigm. So the diagram, as you can see, shows the changing emphasis and the kind of literacy skills that are needed as children grow up or go up the curriculum ladder. The developmental reading program is very much the focus of the school's overall literacy program in the early grades, especially in the development of foundational skills, which we traditionally called beginning reading. Because they cannot, as Claire has said, they cannot read to learn unless they first learn to read. So this portion here, indicates the development of the foundational skills. That's why if you examine the curriculum guide, you'll notice additional domains covered in this stage. We call them the reading foundational skills. For example, the alphabet. Okay, so alphabet knowledge is a foundational skills. Of course, they will not be learning the alphabet hanggang sa grade 6 or grade 12. It is what we call a constrained skill. It has to be done by a certain period. There are three others, I think. There are 3 or 4 domains that are not covered anymore by the 3rd grade because we assume that they have been mastered. And children will move on to develop more advanced skills in literacy. Now, this area becomes wider as the child goes up the curriculum ladder. Yun yung sinabi ni Claire, it's because they are moving now to functional reading. Okay? So this is now reading to learn. So if that's learning to read, this portion is already reading to learn. And this is where reading is more and more applied. When we say reading, I should be talking about literacy because it involves reading, writing, speaking, listening, viewing, and many more. More and more applied to the study of content, to understanding and acquiring of concepts across the curriculum. We'll not talk about remedial reading anymore. It's there somewhere because we have children with special needs. But for our purposes, we are just looking at developmental reading and content area reading. Now, we are looking at a little bit different paradigm because more recently, the term disciplinary literacy has entered the educational jargon. This diagram shows the advancing levels of literacy as the student goes up the curriculum from basic to intermediate and at the top of the pyramid to disciplinary literacy. Let's read what each one covers. Everyone? Basic literacy are
such as the coding and knowledge of high-frequency words that underlie individually all reading tests.
And intermediate
Literacy skills,
common to many tasks,
including generic comprehension strategies, common word meanings, and basic fluency.
And the last one?
Disciplinary literacy, literacy skills specialized to history, science, mathematics, literature, or other subject matter.
Now you'll examine what does disciplinary literacy exactly mean and how is it different from content area literacy. The two are actually overlapping concepts, but they are not exactly synonymous. So we'll examine what each one means and how they relate to each other. But first, I tried to superimpose the old paradigm on this new paradigm and kind of arrived at the conclusion that basic literacy into intermediate literacy will be covering developmental reading from the old paradigm. And As Richard Vaca has pointed out, he is one of the experts of content area literacy. Let's read. Adolescents
Century will read and write more than at any other time in human history. They will need advanced levels of literacy to perform their jobs, run their households, act as citizens, and conduct their personal lives.
take note of take note of the highlighted portion. Advanced levels of literacy. This refers to specialized and advanced levels of literacy that are needed in the discipline. So this is what is meant by disciplinary literacy. So disciplinary literacy is advanced and specialized and focused. So to summarize our discussion so far, content area literacy and disciplinary literacy are umbrella terms that describe two approaches to literacy instruction embedded within different subject areas or disciplines. So let us now examine the distinction between these two to make us understand further what each one means. In terms of the nature of the skills, CAL refer to skills that are generalizable across different content areas, whereas disciplinary literacy skills are specialized and unique to a particular discipline. So, in terms of strategies, CAL instruction provides students with a kind of toolbox or a toolkit of strategies to use with any kind of text, okay? Whereas in disciplinary literacy, strategies are based on the demands of the text and purposes of the discipline. Whereas in disciplinary literacy, the strategies consider the learning demands of the discipline. For example, in terms of textbook use, that is essential in science, but may be irrelevant in literature. Because in literature, you can actually go to authentic materials and use trade books and not rely on a textbook. So let's look at some examples here. KWL can be generalized across any of the subject areas. So here, the example has to do with science. So alam na niyo yung KWL. K stands for?
No.
W?
What I know.
And L? Of course, there are variations na meron pagdagdag na S, what I still want to know, but the idea is the same. What do I already know about ecosystems? What do I want to learn about ecosystems? And what did I learn about ecosystems? The same strategy, of course, can also apply to literature. In this example, the KWL has to do with the study of the novels of George Orwell. The nature of the literacy skills in science, on the other hand, well, this is now disciplinary literacy, will revolve around the use of reading and writing and other literacy activities in connection, for example, with the use of the scientific method, which you know has the steps. Make an observation, ask a question, make a hypothesis, conduct your experiment, draw conclusions, and reporting your results. For example, in the last one, kailangan talaga dyan ang writing skills. Diba? Dyan sa observing, kailangan dyan ng lot of viewing skills, for example, lot of inferring from what you see. Okay, so that's one, the nature of the skills. As far as vocabulary is concerned, I'm sure you can readily identify the differences. In content area literacy, students need to learn general terminology in all fields. Okay? Some are technical, but they are referred to more general knowledge of the subject area or the discipline. And the techniques for developing vocabulary would apply no matter what the words. such as graphic organizers, word sorts, semantic maps, semantic feature analysis, and so on. On the other hand, in disciplinary literacy, the focus is on the specialized nature of the vocabulary of the subjects. For example, in science, many terms have to do with words that make use of Greek and Latin roots. The language in science is precise and dense. And in history, there is a lot of metaphorical terms, and especially with a political point of view. So for example, this is the semantic feature analysis where you have a grid that shows the items on the left and the features of the items on the right, and the students check or make a plus or a minus if the characteristic or feature is present or not. So you can see the intersections. They can, from looking at the chart that they have finished, the students can now conclude, okay, or make classifications of the items that you see on the left. This example is on science, ba yan? History. Early civilizations. This one is, of course, on science, on sources of energy. And this one is on literature. Eras in British literature, for instance. But when you go to disciplines, you need to learn many, many technical terms. I've removed my examples in math and science. These are all in science. That is a tongue twister, of course, and we just say DNA for short, so that makes it simpler. But what does DNA really mean? Divine, Noida, and Agnes. Diba? DNA trio. Okay. But it's what? How do you pronounce this? You like, it's nucleic acid that includes a sugar, which is represented by the affix ibo, but without, which is D, and oxy, which refers to oxygen. Baliktad pa, no? Deoxyribonucleic acid. And then these technical terms can be a source of confusion for many students. Is this meiosis? Is this mitosis? Sino nagpo-produce ng twins? Meiosis, okay. Thank you. Hindi ko sigurado. Is this a chemistry? Is this a solution? Is that a suspension? Is that a colloid? Is it an emulsion? Also, there are many different types of mixture that you study in chemistry. And protons and electrons and neutrons and so on will be terms that you will meet in physics. For most of us, so in the CAL texts, we really refer to sugar as a sweet crystalline substance obtained from various plants, especially sugar cane and sugar beet, consisting essentially of sucrose and used as a sweetener in food and drink. And everyone knows that and can readily understand when the term is used in a text. But when you go to science, you have to pay more attention. And there are terms that come out. There's saccharides, monosaccharides, disaccharides, polysaccharides. Ano nga bang mga yun? Pag marami ka bang polysaccharides, ay magkakaroon ka na ng diabetes. Yung ibig sabihin nun. Okay, anyway, you can see the difference. So this is more specialized and focused. So the kind of literacy required becomes more advanced, and of course difficult to understand. What about comprehension and the making meaning process? In CAL or CAL, we use reading and writing to study or learn information. That's why we say reading to learn. The focus is on learning from the text For example, not to read a book like a chemist, but to know how to study books, including chemistry books. But you're looking at it for information, no? Trying to understand, for example, how a solution is different from a suspension. Okay? But in DL, literacy is used to make meaning within the discipline. The focus is on specialized problems of the subject area, such as cultural differences in how information is used, the nature of the language used, and the demands for precision. Whereas in chemistry, the culture will be different. There is the need to fully understand, for example, the processes and results involved in experimentation. What is important to chemists in reading is a full understanding of the way in which an experiment took place and the processes the experiment uncovered. Gaining that full understanding requires them to think about the phenomenon being presented in the text, to visualize it, and to manipulate it in formulas and equations. So now we look at different cultures within each discipline that require different types of literacy. In terms of texts, when we speak of content area literacy, we often encourage the use of literature, such as trade books, such as poems, that have science concepts or math or history concepts to sustain, to encourage students to learn, to sustain their motivation, to enhance their reading experience. That's why we have thematic units and integrated curricula, which focus on the non-disciplinary use of disciplinary information. You have seen this, the English group, in the last 3 days. Many of the texts of Ma'am Marla, for example, or Teacher Neth, or Ma'am Ruth, have to do with materials that have science concepts or social science concepts in them, but the way we treat it in CAL is still just to evoke, infer, understand the information in the text. Whereas in disciplinary literacy, readers need to confront the language of the discipline. And each type of text from each subject area would differ. As I've already mentioned, science reading would be more technical, abstract. The language of science texts are more technical, abstract, dense. It uses tightly knit language. There's a lot of nominalization, and there's focus on causation rather than intention. Whereas in history, intention, motivation, also in literature, would be an area of consideration. That's not true in science. The role of graphics. In content area literacy, graphics act just as adjunct aids. Interpretive skills are general for pictures, tables, charts, and illustrations. So there are no differences across the discipline. Whereas in disciplinary literacy, there is a need for translation skills. The graphics are an integral part of the text. You cannot understand the whole text without interpreting and looking very closely at the graphics, the diagrams, etc. The technical drawings and pictures differ in their role. So you need to be able to understand those infographics. For example, adjuncts lang itong mga illustration. You can understand the story maybe without that illustration. So adjunct lang siya. No? So the map, the family tree, etc., these are adjunct. They are not really integral. Kumbaga, it just enhances the comprehension of the text because they help the reader visualize what is happening in the text. Whereas if you are looking at technical material, hindi mo maintindihan yung buong chapter without understanding, for example, these types of graphs in algebra, or ano bang pinapakita dito? This is physics, and that's force law, Newtonian law, or whatever it is. Galilean ba? Anyway, force and motion concepts yan, the periodic table in chemistry, and this diagram of the brain in biology. No? So, pati yung pagkakagawa ng diagram dapat precise, di ba? In terms of dimensions, etc. So, they are integral to the text, not just adjuncts. Okay, let's move on and look at this quote. Let us read. In science, the lens should be from the point of view of a scientist. And again, we go back to the scientific method, basically. Okay, so, naging scientist na yata si Simpson. Sino nga ito? Homer. Si Homer Simpson. But anyway, Homer illustrating what is the difference between a scientific opinion and an observation. Okay, so here you make inferences, but here you just observe. Dapat wala kang mga conclusions, or you do not put in your own interpretation. First, you just say it's green and it's leaking, etc. And then you go into an inference. Okay, this might be an old gun that is leaking toxic substances. So I think, to summarize, what we find very helpful is to think about content literacy and disciplinary literacy in terms of what they focus on. So content literacy focuses on the what, okay? What does the text say? Okay? What does the text tell us? Both explicitly and implicitly, whereas disciplinary literacy is more focused on the how, or the process. So when we say content area literacy, the content refers to the discrete topics and themes within within a specific subject. So, for example, the content of science, which will include everything from matter to energy to ano naman to sa quantum mechanics, okay? To genetics, etc., or geology. These are concepts that science students would concern themselves with. So the content is what the student is thinking about. But process, however, refers not to the what, but the how. So we have already mentioned, for example, looking at things from the point of view of the scientific method. Let's read this quote. Go ahead.
Strategies and disciplinary literacy strategies depend on the utilization of text to produce subject matter expertise in students. The difference, however, depends on teachers using those texts to focus on either what students are learning or how they are learning it.
Okay, so I think that's a useful way to distinguish what and how. So that makes it simpler. To summarize, for each discipline, students need to learn the following. Ms. Teacher Vic, the first one.
The specialist vocabulary associated with that area.
Claire?
How to read and understand its text.
Roxanne? Who is responsible for developmental literacy? Who is responsible for CAL? Who is responsible for DL? You can comment on the table and agree or disagree. We can revise it from your point of view. For developmental literacy, I identified specifically language and reading teachers. So Filipino teachers for Filipino and English teachers for English. Of course, the lower grades, there's also the mother tongue. And then, pag content area literacy, pumasok na dyan ang subject area teachers. Okay? That's using reading, writing, etc. for learning content. Okay? So, pagdating naman sa DL, mag-a-attempt ba kayo disciplinary literacy on the scientific method? I won't dare. Kayo, will you do some literary criticism o hindi naman kayo nag-ano sa yung literary text, hindi naman nyo ginagamit, for example. So, your focus now is on the strategies as they are used from the lens of your subject area. So, tama kaya yan? What I'm saying is, when we go to content area literacy, everyone is involved. And the strategies are generic and can cut across. So ang English teachers, pwede silang gumamit ng social science text, pwede silang gumamit ng chemistry, nasa level of understanding ng mga bata. But your focus is on making them understand the information. You are not looking at it from the point of view of tama bang results ng experimentation, etc. Are the arguments given by the scientist correct or not? Those are questions asked by the science teacher in the science class. So pagdating sa mga DL, kanya-kanya na yung lenses. The lens that you are using to make children see the types of text that they are reading. So, okay na kaya to? Does it help us see where we can situate ourselves? Okay? So, if I am an English teacher, these are my responsibilities. And then when I move to content area literacy, I can use some science text, some ESP text, some music text. But when I go to DL, then I will focus on literature. And conversely, that's also done by teachers in the other content subjects. So language arts literacy standards are meant to support, not supplant, the subject area standards. They are meant to buttress the teaching and learning of content. When educators, everyone read.
Literary practices over time, both reading language standards and content standards are more likely to be met, and students will develop a deeper understanding of the content.
It's according to ILA. So it points out our complementary roles. Let's read. Therefore,
A literacy program works best when language arts teachers and content area teachers respect and understand each other's roles and collaborate to help all students learn and be engaged with texts.
okay, I'm putting the burden on your shoulders.